Welcome to Torah Today Ministries. My name is Grant Luton.
I'm Robin Luton.
And we're here to discuss Torah portion Vayeishev, which is in Genesis chapters 37 through 40. And I have to admit, this is just one of my favorite passages because this gets us into the thick of the story of Jacob and Joseph.
Yeah.
And as we were discussing earlier, just how to start this off, the thing that's overarching when we come to the story of Joseph is that there's no character in the entire Hebrew Scriptures whose life foreshadows the life of Yeshua more than that of Joseph.
Right.
In fact, just in a cursory reading, if you look for these things, you'll find easily 42 parallels between Joseph's life and Yeshua's life.
And then digging deeper, even more.
You'll find at least that many more,
Wow.
at least. And the sages over the years have been puzzled about Messiah's coming because they see prophecies of a Messiah coming who's going to be rejected by his brothers. Mm-hmm. He's going to come riding on a donkey, and he's going to be humble and lowly and suffer. Then they see prophecies of a Messiah who comes and rules as a king, and he conquers his enemies. He comes riding in on a horse. And they just had so much difficulty reconciling these two kinds of prophecies.
Do they expect two separate messiahs?
They figured there must be two separate messiahs coming.
Right.
So they call the one Mashiach ben Yosef, Messiah, son of Joseph, because they see in Joseph a picture of a Messiah who comes. His brothers don't recognize him. He lives among the Gentiles. But then the other they call Mashiach ben David, Messiah, son of David.
So it's traditionally recognized that there are messianic hints in the story
Absolutely.
of Joseph.
Yes. And of course, we know that we don't have two messiahs. We have one Messiah, but it comes at two different times.
Boy.
And the first time when Messiah came, he came as Yeshua ben Yosef.
Even his earthly father's
name was Joseph. But when he returns, he comes a conquering king to establish the kingdom of David. And what a day that'll be. The other thing that I want our listeners to be aware of is that in this Torah portion, there are 3 pairs of dreams.
Well, this is still the month of dreams.
This is the month of dreams,
right?
Yes.
On our calendar.
Yes. And so you see Joseph having 2 dreams. Those 2 dreams, by the way, picture Yeshua's first advent and his second advent.
Well, that's a key.
That's a very key one. We might discuss that if we have time.
Okay.
Then Pharaoh has a pair of dreams. And then at the end, the Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, between the 2 of them, have a pair of dreams.
See, that story is so mysterious. It'd be fun to bring some clarity.
Yeah, we'll have to dig into that one for
right.
sure. That's a very, very messianic part of this Torah portion. So go ahead and share with us what some of the things you saw in this Torah portion, Robin.
Well, Grant, as we sit here this morning, all the way up until this portion, every time we sit and have these conversations, I feel the weight of responsibility because we want to make sure that what we share is not only relevant, but accurate, not just our feelings about things.
Sure.
And today is no different, but today it's accompanied by this really deep feeling of gratitude and sort of a feeling of how did we get to do this? and I'm just feeling very, very humbled by it.
I understand what you mean.
So as we look at Vayeishev, it means and he dwelt. And our opening verse is, now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. And I rarely get past the opening words of a portion because I always sense that they're a key. And I believe the same is true of this portion. Jacob had been through a lot, Grant.
Yes.
He had lived through a lot of upheaval. He'd lost his beloved Rachel. the whole debacle with Dinah and his sons, all of that. And so there's this sense, the rabbis say, as he sojourns and dwells here in this portion, he's hoping for a little tranquility.
Retirement.
He's wanting to settle. He's wanting to
Yes.
rest. And, you know, we all have an inner desire for that peace and tranquility, don't we?
Yes.
We crave beauty and order, and we're always pursuing it. But on the other hand, we live in a world that's in the midst of spiritual warfare.
Yes.
So how is it that we arrive at that peace and tranquility and shalom, if you will, while being on our toes as a spiritual warrior?
Yeah.
And knowing how to engage the world that we're required to live in until the next world.
Well, there's only one way to do that, and that's to have the record of God's word. Let's take Jacob for example. This is going to be the seventh and the most severe of the 7 tests that he goes through in his life, the loss of his son Joseph. And you know the story, he assumes he's dead. He's been killed by a wild beast. And so for the next 13 years, he thinks his son Joseph is gone, and he just grieves. He just grieves. And it's actually more than 13 years. But
Can you imagine?
but he was just devastated. He lost his beautiful Rachel. Now he's lost his son, Joseph. Now, let's rewind this, and let's say Jacob could read this Torah portion. He could read the book of Genesis.
And he knew the end.
And then knew the end from the beginning. How would he go through this differently?
Well, he would have more of that tranquility.
He would have to, he'd know, okay, I'm not going to be seeing Joseph for more than a decade, but he's alive. Everything's on track. God's plan is come to fruition.
And those dreams were, in fact, true.
Yes. And though I can't see what's going on, I know that God's running the world. I know the ending is a happy one. We can have that assurance because we see that same kind of a plot play out over and over and over again in the scriptures.
This is why this story is detailed for us in the
Yes. So we have to trust God in our own lives. Every one of us is a Jacob trying to become an Israel. And so when things look bleak and hopeless and empty and God doesn't seem to be anywhere around, this is when we choose courage, we choose faith, knowing that God runs the world. And if we just wait upon the Lord, we will mount up on wings as eagles. And we just have to know that the ending's going to be good.
You know, Grant, every Friday night when we light our candles, part of our Sabbath prayer is, "Blessed art thou, Lord God, King of the universe, who presented tranquility to his people Israel."
Yes.
And I always flinch a little because I think, okay, but where is that tranquility? And when does it really come about for good? And today I was thinking about it again, and I was pondering Psalm 27. It says, "I must dwell in his house, for in the day of trouble he will conceal me in his shelter."
Yes.
So there's a sense of walking through this life where tranquility is typically pretty elusive, but dwelling in his house. And when David wrote that psalm, the temple hadn't literally been built.
Yet.
He was dwelling in God's house the same way that we can dwell in God's house.
Spiritual sense.
In our
Right.
spiritual imagination in a very real way.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the things that you and I kind of disagreed with before we sat down, I had been reading a lot of opinions about
We won't let people
Joseph.
know that we sometimes disagree. I thought we're going to keep that to ourselves.
I had kind of approached this story believing the rumor that Joseph was kind of a braggadocious tattletale, and that the story opens with an immature and sort of naive, insensitive appeal to his family to hear and appreciate his dreams.
Yeah.
But after talking about it, I agree with you. So tell me again what you were sharing about the importance of the way we approach the story.
Well, first of all, we know that Joseph is a human being. We know he certainly made errors and he sinned and came short of the glory of God like all of us do. But in the scriptures, he is not portrayed with any faults. Because God has this story constructed in such a way that Joseph, and everything he does, everything he says, he pictures Messiah.
Right.
And so it would be odd to start off the story with Joseph being kind of bratty and egotistical by blabbing about these dreams he's given. And I know Yeshua would never do such a thing. So it made me go back and reinterpret Joseph's motives for sharing these dreams. And I believe that he shares these dreams because they were so utterly overpowering. They were so beyond anything he could possibly comprehend. They were
And he was so excited about it.
They were so mind-blowing,
Right.
he had to talk about them.
And he assumed his family would be just as thrilled as he was.
Well, who else does he talk to?
Right.
Except those closest to him.
Right.
That's his brothers and his father.
And the dreams did include them, so he thought, hey guys, listen to what God spoke to me
Yeah.
about us.
And he doesn't say what the dreams mean. He says, it's almost like, help me out here. This is blown my mind. This is amazing. And the thing is, when you think about Yeshua, and of course these dreams they shared, this is what really put the brothers over the top and they wanted to kill him. But think of Yeshua. He didn't have to work the miracles. He did not have to say the things he did. He could have kept mum and they wouldn't have crucified him.
Right.
But he shared the things he shared and allowed himself to be accused of the things he was accused of and to be misunderstood.
The fact is,
But he was truth. Everything he said was true.
as we're talking this morning, I'm realizing more than ever the truth and light often are the things that are going to invite the most scorn.
Absolutely.
It did in the case of
Absolutely,
Messiah, and
yes.
it did in the case of Joseph.
Sure.
Quickly, though, in the two dreams that Joseph has as we start this Torah portion, one thing I noticed this year, the second dream included his mother Rachel. And that irritated or upset Jacob.
Yeah.
And we were discussing that last night as
Right.
well.
Well, let's just read the two dreams. It's only 4 verses. It's in chapter 37, starting with verse 6. I'm sorry, with verse 6. He said to them, hear, if you please, this dream which I dreamt. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the middle of the field, so it's harvest time, when, behold, my sheaf arose and also remained standing. Then, behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. His brother said to him, would you then reign over us? So you see them interpreting the dream for Joseph.
Right.
I'm not even sure if Joseph knew what it meant.
Right.
But it says, would you reign over us? Would you then dominate us? And they hated him
They
even
immediately
more.
jumped to being insulted.
Yes.
Right.
And because of his dreams, because of his talk. Now here's the second dream, verse 9. He dreamt another dream and related it to his brothers. And he said, look, I dreamt another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. And he shared it with his father then. Now, the first dream takes place on earth. The other dream takes place in the heavenlies.
Right.
And the first time, it's just these sheaths bowing down to his. But here it shows the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing down to him himself.
So there's an additional.
Yes. So everything about the first one is earthly. And it's talking about a harvest and sheaves which are cut down. It's talking about a death and a resurrection.
So it's earthy.
Yes, very earthy. It's his first coming. But the second one is referring to Yeshua's return, which is going to be a very spiritual thing.
It's celestial.
And this, the sun and moon. And Jacob interprets this as himself and his wife, Rachel, who's dead.
Right.
So it is the resurrected come to bow down to Messiah himself.
Wow.
And I think Joseph really didn't know what these dreams meant. He just spilled them. But I think others understood better than maybe he did at the time what these were referring to.
Well, when I was reading through it this year, I really noticed more than ever the tendency for his brothers to band together and agree together to be against him.
Yes.
And I thought of Psalm 1, one of our very favorites. Obviously, beginning with how blessed or how happy is the one who doesn't walk in the counsel of the wicked. They walked in each other's counsel, didn't they? Nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. And they so clearly became scoffers and mockers, and then they started to literally plot against him.
Yeah.
And I went to the idea that traditionally it has been understood that the thing that destroyed Messiah himself and also brought destruction to the physical temple, the second temple, is referred to as
Sinat Kinam.
Sinat Kinam, which is translated hatred without a cause. And here it's so clear.
Yes.
They sold their brother to strangers.
For silver.
For silver. And Rashi himself in commentaries say that this is one of the most perplexing events in the Torah. And it's hard to excuse, it's hard to explain unless we know who Joseph really represents.
That's exactly right. Yeshua is the key that unlocks everything in these Torah portions from here to the end of Genesis. Absolutely.
But here's the, real quick though,
Sure.
The thing that I love too, as I go on in Psalm 1, I was looking at, the scoffing, but verse 2 says, but a godly man's delight is in the law of the Lord, or the truth. And in that law, he meditates day and night. And that denotes creating that place of tranquility internally.
Yes.
You're able to dwell, you're able to sit, you're able to rest. He will be like a tree firmly planted.
Yes.
And I always notice that the tree in Psalm 1 is a tree that God has planted. It's intentional. The place where you are is the place he has planted you. And if we can learn to dwell, then no matter what is happening, we can have that inner tranquility and rest.
That's right. That's right. Well, it's we need to stay where we're planted, and
that's so hard to do.
That's so hard to do. And you see Joseph's brothers not being where they're supposed to be, because his father sends him to find his brothers, just as the father sent Yeshua to seek and to save that which is lost, to seek his brothers. And so he goes to Shechem. Shechem means shoulder, but also means portion. So he went to Shechem where they're supposed to be, because that's their Shechem, their portion.
Right.
They weren't there. They weren't where they're supposed to be.
Wandering.
Yeah, and so finally someone says, oh, they went to Dothan. Well, Dothan means double law. It's a word that basically means legalism. And when Yeshua came to his brothers, he found them not where they're supposed to be, which is joyfully fulfilling the commandments of Torah.
There's like this religious restlessness.
They had gone into religion, into a depth of religion to where God had no other purpose than simply to give them something to create theology around. And they got into a place of legalism. And in that legalism, they became proud and jealous and angry of him and wanted to kill him. And it's in Dothan where the brothers plot to kill Joseph.
And jumping ahead just a little, another thing I noticed is that after the horrible event when Joseph's put in the pit and Judah had been really the instigator, it came about at that time, the beginning of chapter 38, that Judah went down, or he departed from his brothers. Now he's even departing from them.
Yes.
And he's leaving them. He's
Yes.
not dwelling. And that going down really denotes a spiritual leaving.
Yes, yeah. And Judah and Judas are the same name. And just as Joseph was sold for silver, he sold for 20 pieces of silver. Yeshua sold for 30. I just put that up to inflation. But we know that was basically the price of a slave at that time. And Judas, according to tradition, and you can kind of see it in the scriptures here as well, was the one who was the instigator for selling him. And we know that Judas in the Gospels is the one who sold Yeshua. And Judas in the Gospels was so depressed, he went out and hanged himself.
Wow.
Well, this Judah is so depressed, he leaves his brothers, he goes off and takes a Gentile bride. And chapter 38 is a very, very odd chapter.
It is. And for just a moment, if I can digress to personalize all this, anybody who's familiar with like the Enneagram, you may like it, you may not, but I am like a 1, a strong number 1. And those of you who know the Enneagram numbers are moaning, going, oh no, not a 1. I'm a firstborn. I tend to be a fixer. And so for me to wait, for me to dwell, it's been a lifetime pursuit.
Yeah.
And I'm still working on it to find that inner tranquility and rest. And you know what it requires, Grant? It requires waiting.
Yeah,
it requires waiting
really.
and waiting and waiting some more so often. And that's another thing that is a theme in this portion. I mentioned it a moment ago. But you know, time is something that isn't going to exist in the next world.
Right.
It exists in this,
It's not
in
gonna be a
this
limitation,
world.
yes.
And I'm convinced that one of the reasons that God ordained for us to live in this thing called time is for us to have to learn to endure and understand and be at rest with the lapse of time between a prayer and a sense that he's hearing and answering, between a choice which we know is the brave and righteous one and the fruit of that choice, or sometimes a choice that others or we ourselves make that is wicked, and then there's a lapse and we mistakenly think, well, we got away with that, and there isn't a consequence.
We never get away with anything.
So the time lapse is that space where trust is required.
Exactly. And time is something God created so we would have free will. Because every time we do an action, usually the consequence is delayed. Unless you drop a brick on your toe, then the consequence is pretty immediate. But most of the time we do a good deed, and the consequence of that good deed is delayed. It could be days, months, years. It could be the next generation.
Look at Joseph.
Yes. And sometimes if people do something wicked, then they're not caught right away. They think, I got away with that. But no, there'll be a consequence. But time is the distance between the action and the consequence. And during that period of time, it seems like God may not be watching. He's not rewarding as he should. He's not punishing as he should.
He's not hearing.
He's not hearing,
seeing,
but he is.
but he is.
And so we have free will.
And nothing is random.
No. You know, speaking of time, there's a very odd birth in chapter 38. Chapter 38 is a parenthetical chapter. If you go from the end of 37 and then pick up with the beginning of 39,
You would never miss.
you would never
chapter
notice there's supposed
38.
to be a chapter in between. But in chapter 38, you see these twins born to Judah.
That is the weirdest story ever.
There's only 2 pair of twins in the Bible. That's Jacob and Esau. And that's a weird birth.
And it's another clue about the Messiah.
It's a Messiah because it talks about these twins. And so in verse 28, right at the end of chapter 38, it says, and it happened as she gave birth, one put out a hand. Now picture this. He put out a hand, the midwife took a crimson thread and tied it on his hand, saying, this one emerged first. But the baby doesn't come all the way out. It's just like it visits. It puts its hand out, gets the red thread, and it was as he drew back his hand that, behold, his brother emerged. And she said, with what strength you asserted yourself.
Is this Tamar?
And called his name Perez. This is Tamar. Then verse 30, afterwards his brother on whose hand was the crimson thread came out, and he called his name Zerah.
Right.
So this baby puts his hand out. They tie his crimson thread to it. He pulls his hand back in. His brother is born. And then the first one comes out, but this time to stay. You see the picture?
Yes, but
Yeshua,
explain it anyway.
Yeshua is God's hand that came into the world, and that red thread represents the fact we put him to death. We shed his blood. And he left.
Right. And there's a time lapse.
And there's a time lapse. There's a wait.
And we're required to trust that he means what he says.
In the meantime, something else is born. And we're not going to take time here, as our time's almost gone. But then when he comes back, it's almost like Yeshua says, here's my hands and my feet. Here's the proof. This baby comes out with a scarlet thread. But this time, he's here to stay. So it's a picture of Yeshua's first coming when he came into the world to accomplish his purpose, then left. He withdrew. But when he returns is to come to stay forever. And that scarlet thread, like his scars, his hands and feet, are the proof of who he was. I'm the same one who was here before.
So
but now I'm here to stay.
I'm sitting here thinking quickly, even that crazy, what appeared to be a pretty big lapse of judgment that Judah displays, the result and the fruit of it is this picture that we get, another picture of Messiah.
Absolutely.
But that's another subject.
Yeah.
Are you going to want to share some parallels that we need to see between Joseph and Messiah? Where do you want to go?
I would love to look at the two dreams of the cupbearer and the baker.
Let's do that.
So, I mean, for Joseph, things go from bad to worse. I mean, he's sold by his brother.
Seemingly.
Yeah, but seemingly. And then he's falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, and now he winds up in prison in Egypt. I mean, how low can you go? And he's there. And while he's there, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker have been put in prison because of something that happened. And they each have a dream on the same night. And so they share their dreams with Joseph, and Joseph interprets them. The cupbearer, who brings wine to Pharaoh, he shares his dream, and just to cut it short, the interpretation is that in 3 days you'll stand before Pharaoh once again, putting the wine cup in his hand. But the baker's dream, the one who makes the bread for Pharaoh, he shares his dream, and Joseph doesn't have a happy ending for him. He says in 3 days, they're going to lift your head up off your shoulders. And you're going to a sticky end. And
what's funny is, once again, Joseph isn't appearing to be very discriminating about what he shares. He just shares what he sees.
And of course, the dreams were fulfilled exactly as he said. Now here, we have a cupbearer who takes wine, a baker who makes bread. Bread and wine, wine and bread. What is this significant of? And of course, we think of Yeshua's blood and body. And the blood, he says, like the Passover lamb, the blood is for the Father to see. It's put on the outside of the house of the Passover home. And God says, when I see the blood, I'll pass over you. And so the blood is something that is shed, and when the Father sees the blood, then, we're restored. We're passed from death to life.
Right.
But the body of Yeshua was beaten and tortured and crucified.
And broken.
Yeah, and he who knew no sin became sin for us. And we see the body just completely rejected and destroyed. And but it's the bread that represents the body of Yeshua that passes us from slavery to freedom. But likewise, with this cupbearer, he's restored to Pharaoh. But the baker, he is put to death. He's destroyed. And it's just an amazing story. But the thing that stands out to me is that when he interpreted the cupbearer's and the baker's dreams, he asked the cupbearer, knowing that he would live, says, "Now when you come before Pharaoh, remember me to him."
Yeah, because I'm still down here.
Yeah, I'm still down here. Tell Pharaoh I'm here. And the cupbearer forgets.
Do you think he forgot, or he just...
I think he forgot.
Wow.
I think he forgot. And then years later, a couple years later, he remembers.
More waiting.
And I started thinking, a lot of believers tend to just want to keep Yeshua locked up in prison. Because the moment Joseph came out of prison, he became the ruler of Egypt. And when we let Yeshua out of prison, he becomes the ruler in our lives. But we kind of like to keep him locked up, and you just keep running things there. You kind of stay behind the scenes, keep things humming along, as Joseph did in the prison. He made everything run so smoothly, Just keep blessing me and making my life, smooth, but I'll run things out here.
It's an illusion that we're in control of it.
It's an illusion. But when we let Yeshua out of prison, when we unleash him in our lives and get him freedom to be Lord and Master, that's when the world changes. That's when our lives make an impact upon the world. Because once Joseph came out and he's elevated to the place he was, he brings salvation to all the people around him. He impacted the world. But we like to keep him locked up. We like to keep him asleep in the bottom of the boat. We'll haul him out when we have a storm. But otherwise, just stay asleep down there.
Or as our good friend talks about this time of year, he kind of shakes his head and laughs. He says, since I've become a Torah student, I've recognized that Christianity loves to keep Jesus a little baby in a manger. This time of year, he's just this cute little cherub baby in a manger. And about the time he starts to grow up, we put him back in that manger. And he never gets beyond being a cute little baby in a manger. But we know that he becomes the savior of the world, past, present, future, and that he'll return as a king.
And the sun, moon, and stars bow to him.
Right.
Yeah. So, when Yeshua came the first time, he let people do to him whatever they wanted to do. He was a lamb. And if they wanted to worship him, they could worship him. If they wanted to follow him, they could follow him. If they wanted to beat him and crucify him, they beat him and crucified him. He allowed us to do with him whatever we wanted to do. But by nature, he's a lion. He is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, which is a prophecy that comes up at the end of Genesis. And when he returns, he will do with us what he wants to do.
Well,
it's the other way around.
I'm sitting here thinking of Joseph. He allowed himself, he was kind of at the mercy of his brothers. It seemed to be put into that empty pit or tomb. Yeah. And once he came out, he rose to power, and suddenly they're at his mercy.
That's right. So next week, we're going to see 7 years of trouble or tribulation come. And during those 7 years, Joseph will reveal himself to his brothers.
I love this portion, but next portion.
Oh my goodness.
It takes my breath away.
Are you as frustrated as I am that our 30 minutes goes by so quick?
I'm very frustrated.
I feel like we say so little.
I know. Probably just a frustration to people listening as well. But before I end what I want to share this morning, Psalm 91, another of our favorites, Grant, begins by saying, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust." Yeah. And that's where the tranquility comes from.
That's right. So we trust that he's got it covered, that he runs the world. We have to trust he runs the world. No matter what our senses and the newspapers say, he runs the world, and he serves the best wine last. And this life will have a happy ending.
And the time lapse means nothing.
It doesn't mean anything.
In light of eternity.
Not a bit. Yeah. All right. Well, I hope if you are frustrated, wishing we could talk more about some of these things, then turn that frustration into study and go over this Torah portion over and over and over this week and see how many parallels you can find between Joseph and the life of Yeshua. It's a great study to do.
Yeah, I mean, I've loved just dwelling in the portions as they come and walking through them and thinking about them and talking about them. And I hope that if you live alone, you'll do it. If you have a friend to join you, you'll do it with that friend. If you're married, do it with your spouse and your kids. Talk about these things.
Absolutely.
And let these portions be a really important part of your journey.
That's right.
It gives us what we need.
So at this point, we're going to release you to go and study on your own and discuss it with your significant other. So until next time, we wish you God bless and shalom.
Shalom.